right, let's get started. How's everybody doing today? Good. All right, so I want to jump right into our speaker today, Seph Skerritt, who is the founder and CEO of Proper Cloth. He founded Proper Cloth in 2008, which has since grown into a business, as you've seen with some of the quotes up here, that's a leading brand for men's custom dress shirts. In his role at Proper Cloth, Seph is closely involved in new technology development, product design, marketing, advertising, and the business. Prior to Proper Cloth, Seph received an MBA from MIT Sloan. He has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of California at San Diego, and he now lives here in New York City. So he has a very interesting background and a connection between the tech and design, which I think will be very interesting in our conversation today. So welcome, Seph, to FIT. Have you come on up? You guys can clap better than that. By the way, before we get started, if you didn't notice, your homework assignments have been graded and they're up there so you can grab those. I fold them so you can't see each other's grades, which I think is good, right? All right. Well, welcome to FIT. It's really great to have you.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
So I always like to start off with a bit of a broader questions, just to kind of get a sense of what Proper Cloth is all about, and then maybe we can kind of jump backwards from there and kind of move back up from a personal perspective.
Okay,
So
sure.
Tell us about Proper Cloth.
Proper Cloth. Yeah, as you said, we are a menswear company. We're e-commerce mainly, and we're focused on, when we started, we focused on men's custom shirts, and that even today is still our bread and butter. Making it easy for guys to purchase custom fit or custom design dress shirts online was our initial entry. Since then, we've added sweaters and jackets and raincoats and ties and pocket squares and all sorts of accessories. So we've kind of really broadened the line. And then even more recently, last year, we started doing custom fit suits and trousers and sport coats. So
Interesting. So it started in 2008. What was sort of the impetus for starting this company? I mean, there is a long tradition of tailoring for men's, and it has been, I think a lot of people have tried to connect both technology and this sort of tradition of handmade. What was sort of your thought process in going into Proper Cloth and how you were approaching it maybe differently than other people were?
Yeah. So a little before that, I guess, so I'd studied electrical engineering in college, and then my first job out of school, I worked at a big technology company and was building systems and putting things together, and that was fascinating from a kind of technology standpoint, but really infuriatingly boring from a big company like Pace sort of standpoint. I'd also started a company when I was in college, my first company, which was like an event planning, marketing, sort of morphed into a nightclub promotion business. But so this was kind of like a marketing, and this was marketing kind of job or kind of business, and it was my first experience of running a company. So I was like, around that time in my life, I wanted to start a company, another company. I didn't know what to start. I knew I didn't want to work at that big tech company anymore. I liked branding. I liked marketing. I knew I could do some things with technology, so I didn't know what to do, so I applied to business school, and then I spent 2 years just basically like searching for an idea of something I could start. And
So did this come out of your MBA then?
Sort of. So I was like, oh, how about a social network company? How about a geolocation app company? How about a clean tech company? I was sort of all over the map, but then I did internships in Shanghai and Bangalore that summer. And when I was in Shanghai, just as a tourist there, really one of the hosts was like, hey, let's go get custom shirts and suits while you're here. They're really cheap, and I know where the right guy to go is, and I'll negotiate to get you a good price. So we did that, and to me, the experience was really good. It was just like, wow, you just tell the guy what you want and you get it, and it fits you right, instead of going to the store, trying on 10 different things. This one's too small, this one's too big, this one fits great, but the style's not right or whatever, and just kind of compromising. So I had flown all the way to Shanghai to have that experience, and it was like, how come we don't have this in the States, or how come I never had this available to me? And so kind of looking at the market, it seemed that there were options, but they were either really expensive or they were only available in certain cities. You had these traveling tailors coming, visiting New York periodically, kind of marketing to bankers and finance. And they wanted you to meet them in a hotel room, and to me that just seemed kind of weird. And so price was part of the problem. Accessibility from a geographical standpoint was part of the problem. And really, brand was a part of the problem. And so I had grown up surfing and hiking and being outdoors. And so to me, like, all the custom clothing brands were like, you're wearing an ascot and a bow tie and you're just some kind of dandy. And I was like, none of those brands, I was never going to go to Ascot Chang, even if I could afford it, because it just wasn't like who I was. So to me, it seemed like there was also an opportunity to create a brand that was a little more accessible as well. So that was kind of like the idea, the concept, how we thought we could fit into the market. And at the same time, e-commerce was really starting to become more and more of a thing. Really, it's 2008 is only 10 years ago, but back then there was still a lot of talk that you can't buy stuff on the internet, your credit card will get stolen, or okay, fine, you can buy books on the internet, but you definitely can't buy clothes because you need to try stuff on and touch the fabric. There was a lot of that sort of resistance, but it seemed pretty clear to me that it was going that way eventually.
It's so interesting because the conversation around direct-to-consumer, which is the D2C that we hear about a lot, has sort of morphed into this sort of funnel of experience, and typically the companies that are doing the best are very one-style companies, and that's how they start. And in many ways, you guys sort of started that model. I mean, there was not a lot of people that were doing this type of direct-to-consumer in 2008.
Yeah, it wasn't a phrase you heard. Direct-to-consumer, digitally native, vertical brands, these were terms that happened later. Bonobos existed, but they were very small in 2008. They weren't really on most people's radar, but they were around for maybe a year or so before we started. But yeah, the idea that you could start a brand online without needing a ton of money was kind of, most investors or most people would tell you, no, you can't do that.
So I want to go back to you were an event planner essentially in college, but it's so interesting that you talked about event planning and then you went to Shanghai, had this experience of getting a suit, and really sort of Proper Cloth is not just the shirt, it's an experience that you've sort of curated a process online. Was that important to you? Is that whole idea of how a man would shop and find, I mean, you were also mentioning your own personal life, just a certain aesthetic. What were those kinds of conversations early on? Because again, it was a shirt. Yeah. So what were you talking about with your partners and business associates in terms of how to set yourselves apart or how to communicate to the customer differently?
Well, I think that for a lot of guys and myself, at the time, shopping was not like a pleasurable experience. I didn't want to go to a place and have a scotch necessarily. I just wanted to get what I wanted and have it be easy. So a lot of what we were thinking about was how can we use technology to make it so that this is a self-service sort of thing. You don't have to go meet someone and have this awkward hotel meeting and with stuff spread out on the bed. Like, you can just go at home and log on and do it. And so that was a big part of our initial approach. I think with a background in engineering, you sort of think, oh, I can figure that out. I'll just break it down and take it apart. And so we really tried to do that for the customer. And so a lot of our early customers were like the more tech-savvy folks who were like, oh, sure, I can measure my own shirt at home and type in the dimensions, and that should work. Mm-hmm. And so that was how we sort of really initially got in, was trying to make the experience as self-serve as possible, which had the added benefit of making the business as streamlined and efficient as possible, because we were enabling the customer to do the work themselves instead of having to send someone to go through that process.
So you didn't come from a fashion background. Do you think that part of the success is owed to the fact that you sort of had to deconstruct the process of the shirt itself as part of the UX of your customer experience or the website?
That's a good question. When the business initially started, it was pretty clearly not a fashion company. It was a shirt company, and we were selling pretty boring white dress shirts, blue dress shirts. There was nothing interesting about the style or the design. We didn't have like a new silhouette or some kind of amazing pattern. We weren't on any trends. It was like kind of like the same shirts you could get at Brooks Brothers, but custom fit at a better price. And so but there was so many other problems to solve with just like, okay, how do you set up the supply chain and the logistics, and how do you make the user experience and the user interface work? So we had our hands full there, and we were really comfortable with just the product itself being pretty basic. And that was really the first year or so, was not a lot going on the actual design of the style of the product.
Interesting. I think that there's this kind of sense, especially among sort of fashion design students or fashion designers, that it is very much about a certain style and aesthetic. And what you're describing here is, let's figure out how to sell a basic shirt, what that process is. Because if we can prove that, then we can essentially sell anything, right?
Yeah, well, we had to invent this supply chain. That was the real thing. Like a lot of other things, you get your Shopify e-commerce site, you're done. You get your, you go to the sample shop up here and they make your samples. You've got those. You just kind of like, it's all laid out. But for custom, we had to like figure out how to get the fabrics to the right factory, how we're going to communicate the orders, how we're going to QA them. The customer service became very complicated because they were troubleshooting people's fit problems or fabric issues. So we had to invent all of that. And so we just had to focus on getting that baseline to work and that kind of infrastructure to work. After like a couple years, we started to hit a ceiling though, where we were like, okay, we need the product to be more interesting, because white and blue dress shirts aren't really getting people jazzed up. And some people are interested in buying it, and that's what they need, but how can we have we realize we need to create a brand. We need to like have some fun, interesting, eye-catching stuff. And so that sort of later in the company became a bigger focus.
So you started off really as focused on technology and operational functionality. And I'm curious, because not only were you inventing the supply chain, but you were having to bring in people into that supply chain and convincing them that this was going to work, right? I mean, the typical factory doesn't just do made to measure in this fashion.
Yes, but this is actually why custom shirts was a great starting point, because custom shirts exists already. So we weren't going to a factory that makes 1,000 shirts in bulk and saying, hey, can you make us one at a time? We were able to go to factories that were already doing custom for other, like traveling tailors or for Brooks Brothers or other kind of retailers. So we actually didn't have to convince them. But like our first factory we worked with was in North Carolina. It's actually owned by Brooks Brothers. And then later we worked with another custom shirt factory in New Jersey. But the problem was these factories have no technology, and they're like, they wanted, this wasn't that long ago, they were like, okay, so here's how it works. Here's the order form. We'll give you this sheet. You like write on this form the name of the customer, the dimensions, the fabric ID. You take this out, then you fax it into us, like, and then we'll make the order and we'll send it out to you. And you can imagine, like, you want to build an e-commerce business at scale, and you want to fax each order in one at a time. So we had sort of struggles, and we had to really, this is where a lot of the convincing happened, was like, hey, what if we automatically generate this PDF and send it to you? Or actually, what if we don't use PDF? What if we use a digital file format so that it removes all the manual entry work that is costing you money and creating errors? Right. So that was where we had to put a lot of energy in, actually.
That's fascinating, because in many ways, especially in the shirting industry, that these people have owned these businesses for generations, right? Having been to a few of these, they literally handwrite everything. Do you feel like in a way that you were able to kind of bring them along on the journey and now they've become sort of believers in this new technology?
Unfortunately, no. The factories, we were a small, struggling company at the time, so we couldn't do much heavy lifting for them. Ultimately, it led us to finding an offshore partner who was sophisticated and was like investing and had a vision for custom clothing being the future of their business, and had money and capital that they could invest, and had an IT department, and had people and expertise in that area. Once we found that partner, we were able to really build together and kind of get that going.
So one of the defining things about direct-to-consumer, and we'll get into the more specifics about what you're doing today, is the data. But having been in e-commerce in the early 2000s, data, the idea of using data was just emerging. Was that part of your concept early on, to be able to use data to custom make shirts, or was this something that was sort of the idea in general, but you had to sort of manually do this early on? Or how did data play a role in terms of how you built this company?
Data plays a role across the entire business in so many ways. I think initially, from a user experience though, it seemed like, to me, so obvious that if I'm getting a custom product, I want my custom size profile to be saved somewhere. And I want to be able to reorder that product in that same size. And where's that stored? Is it stored on a piece of paper somewhere? No, it should obviously be stored in a database. And if I want to make changes to it or see what it is, do I have to call somebody up and have him tell me what it is? Or is it like hidden from me in some way? No, I want to go in and I want to see it. And I maybe want to adjust it, or I want to kind of know what's going on. So, which is how it is for all your other services that you have today, right? So to me, that seemed like a straightforward way we were going to use customer data to make their customer experience better. But then over time, one of the cool things about e-commerce is you are inherently collecting data about your customers, because you have a record of what they've purchased. And then when you can start to correlate what they've purchased to other things, you're able to start to find insights. And there's probably two big ways we've used data to improve the experience over time. One is for fabrics. So we always want to have the best fabrics, and you're all designers, right? So sometimes you may be working with someone and you're like, I think this fabric's better, and they're like, no, I think this fabric's better, and you're like, well, that one's too shiny, and they're like, no, that one's not shiny enough, and you can kind of debate, and it's like, well, it's subjective, I guess I prefer this and you prefer that, and you can kind of never answer those questions, right? The biggest case for us was like the white dress shirt. White is our most popular fabric, if you're curious. Actually, of our top 10 styles, the top 5 are probably plain white, different versions of plain white. And so we had I remember we had this white pinpoint. White pinpoint's like a very classic, common style. So, but you can still get white pinpoints in different weights, with different treatments, with different finishes, different thicknesses. And so we were always just like, should we get it with this or that? And kind of stumped on which one was better. Is that too wrinkle resistant because it doesn't breathe? Is this not wrinkle resistant enough? And so we started to really aggressively survey our customers for feedback. And that was when we were able to start to do experiments and basically sell both of those fabrics and see which one got better reviews. And when you start to have real volume on your orders, then you can start to really make insightful choices. So that white fabric might have 1,000 reviews and an average rating of 4.723 out of 5, and then the other one might have 400 reviews and have an average rating of 4.8123, and you're like, it's slightly better. So the debate's over. So you're like, okay, we're going to focus on this one now.
That's so fascinating, because in so many ways, when you're online, you could have 2 or 3 styles with one of it doing most of the work. So you have to ask the question, is it one just replacing the cell of another, right?
Yeah, and definitely in that case, you don't want too many things that are too similar because it's just confusing. Like, wait, isn't this that also? So that was one way we've been able to use data to drive incremental improvements across the business over time. And it's like this concept of, if I can make that fabric 1% better this month, and then maybe I'll try 3 more options like over the course of the year. And if I can like continue to improve it over time, you start to end up with really good stuff. They say, I think there's some kind of saying, if you improve 1% per day, you improve like 1,000% in the year. And so there's kind of this like concept of very incremental improvement. So that was one example of technology.
So you didn't come from a fashion background, and you mentioned you started with sort of really basic styles and textiles. At what point did you sort of realize, hey, we have to kind of catch up? Because you're talking textiles here, your basic building block. At what point did you have to sort of catch up on, the thousands of different, materials? Because you have to sort of know that in order to survey and get that feedback back, right? So at what point did that kind of come around where you realized we needed to kind of upgrade our knowledge and potentially start hiring people, if you did?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the keys to being successful in this kind of business is just to always be really curious and like, why? What's the difference? What's twill versus pinpoint versus broadcloth versus Royal Oxford versus Dobby? Like, is one better? Why would I want that? Why would I want that? So we were just always asking everyone questions, right? And trying to research more. And actually, one of the way we got a lot of our initial customers was researching all these topics, effectively becoming experts on them, publishing a lot of this content on the web, on our site, and then Google started to give us a lot of organic search traffic because other customers were out there saying, what's the difference between 120s 2-ply and 120s single-ply? So we started to kind of find customers from that. The other part of your question is about, I think, brand and design. And I didn't go to fashion school, so I'm a little jealous of you here. But I was always really passionate and interested in just how do things work? How do I take something apart and understand how it was made? And also, how can I create the perfect version of something? Was always kind of something that I really was passionate about. So to me, you take a shirt or something and you look at it and you say, it's not that complicated. Okay, it's sewn here, there's this shape there's this thing, this has some kind of something in the collar that's making it stiff, maybe it seems like it's stuck to one side of it, the buttons are sewn on with this kind of stitching. Okay, I can break this down. This is not a smartphone, it's just a shirt. So it was kind of you just were taking things apart, putting them together, and then really starting to think about, do I like this or do I like that better? Why does one seem to drape better than the other? How can I make it better? And just kind of continuing to refine and refine and refine.
Did you end up hiring designers at some point, or has that always been not part of your model?
So, sort of. Part of our story is we never really raised outside investment. So, which I don't know if any of you are thinking of doing that. It has a lot of pros and cons. Actually, it's fantastic if it works, I think, but it's very painful if it doesn't. So I spent the first 3 years without any employees. So the first 3 years I was doing all the design, all the factory communication, all the customer service. I was designing the website, I was writing the content, I was reaching out for PR, just doing everything. And that was a very hard 3 years, as you can imagine. It wasn't until around our third year that our sales had grown enough that I could afford someone. Of course, the first person we hired was a customer service person, because that can be the hardest job. And but then after that, and the next person we hired was a photographer, because in e-commerce it became really clear the photos are kind of everything, at least from making the sale. So we hired a photographer full time. And then the next hire was a gentleman, Chris, who was not a trained designer, but was, like me, very passionate about what makes a great product, what makes great design. He'd interned at Ralph Lauren, and I think he'd worked at Suit Supply for a little while. So he had his foot in fashion, but he was really right out of school for pretty much. And so he was able to play many roles, as everyone was. All of those first hires would measure someone if they came into the store, would help style a photo shoot, would help write copy, would think about the brand, would advise on how the website design should go, but eventually started to focus more and more on design. So now it's really Chris and myself that are doing the product design and sourcing.
You mentioned something a little bit earlier on that I want to come back to, because I think this is so key, both in terms of putting new product into the market, but also in terms of a successful business, which is pricing your product right. Did you have a sense going into this sort of what the white space was for that price? Because you're right, there was a lot of Barney's had the $250 custom made shirt, you had others that were doing it, but how did you go about figuring out that price? And then essentially, once you did, was that sort of the defining thing that helped you to build out everything else, or was there something else?
Yeah, I had pretty strong ideas about pricing in the beginning, and I was wrong, which is interesting. I had just finished grad school. I had no money. I was broke. Most of my friends were like kind of similar. So I had this view that the shirts had to be very cheap. They had to be as cheap as possible. And at the same time, we were making the product in the U.S. It was that wasn't cheap. The shipping wasn't cheap. And we were pricing it like to have like a very low margin, thinking like, I think it was $85 is what we were selling for. And it probably cost like $65 or $75 to make and deliver the product. So it was like we weren't making any money, and then you'd have like one thing go wrong and you'd have to remake it for someone. So we were so adamant about trying to be accessible that we really pushed hard on that. Wasn't until like maybe the second year that someone that was advising me, he kept pushing hard, like you have to think about raising your prices. And it was like the best advice, because when you have a low margin product like that, if you raise your price 10%, you can actually double your profit. And so 10% increase in price to the customer is not a big a deal. Maybe you even lose some customers, but you're literally making twice as much as you were before. So finally we kind of rose our prices a little bit. But to be honest, we still like want to have the most accessible price we can, given the economics of what it takes to deliver a great product and produce it. So we now, the price range goes down to $80 and up to $300. So we're covering a very broad price range. I think that kind of $100 to $120 per shirt is our sweet spot. It's such a weird category to think about pricing, because on the one hand, the average price of a dress shirt in America is like $30. Phillips Van Heusen, Costco, I don't know, Amazon's private label brands, who's the big one?
TJ Maxx and
TJ
all
Maxx,
those,
yeah,
right.
all those, right. So all of those shirts are like $25, $20. So to say you're going to, when you're at $60 or $80 or $100, you're way above average already. But at the same time, you have customers who have been buying custom shirts for $250, and they're like, oh my God, it's only $150? This is amazing. So you kind of have this like very wide range of expectations and point of views that customers have. So, and I think when you're young and when you're a student, you're used to shopping at TJ Maxx or like, more affordable type stores. So your kind of context is that I can't charge that much. No one would pay that. But you forget that there's another part of the market that you haven't participated in yet, because you haven't become established yet, that is very interested in what you're making or selling, and they like your story as a young entrepreneur or as an independent designer, and so I think oftentimes like I did, new designers underprice their products when they could be selling for higher.
Oh, it's so interesting. So if 120-ish is kind of around your sweet spot in many cases, that's sort of the Thomas Pink kind of spot. So you're really offering a custom-made shirt at sort of the entry-level luxury market in a way, yeah?
Yeah, we're very like mid-level price range. We never are like, hey, we want to be the cheapest, but at the same time we really want to make sure we're delivering a really high value for the product, and so it's always like a little flattering when you go and you see like a shirt at Barney's that's $250, and you know exactly where that fabric came from because you sell it yourself, and you sell that shirt custom fit for $150, and you're kind of like, okay, yeah, we're doing a good value for the customer here.
And you went back to experience as well, because really part of this is allowing a busy man to go on, have his measurements in, and be able to get custom shirts whenever he wants.
Yeah, I think that's what our customers love about our service, is this feeling that, okay, I've solved that problem now. That problem that, oh, my shirt I need a new shirt. I don't know what to do or where to go, because if I go there, it doesn't fit, there it doesn't fit. I don't know where I can get it. With us, the idea is they have their size saved on their profile, and then we produce so many different styles that you can virtually get casual shirts, dress shirt, business shirts, business casual style shirts, affordable shirts, really premium expensive shirts. So we try to kind of offer them anything they might want in that category, and they know that they can get it. They can just quickly go and order it online. It'll be delivered in 2 weeks, and piece of cake.
So I wanted to also ask about your customer and how, or if you even knew who your core customer was when you started, or if that was something that kind of came as you went. And you sort of kind of already answered this by saying, you know, we're poor graduate students, so we wanted to make shirts for our friends. But how did you, because even early on in 2008, again, it wasn't as sophisticated as what we have today in order to really hone in on those audiences. A lot of that has only happened in the last 4 to 8 years. How did you go after that customer? How did you start to recognize who that core customer was that became your base?
Yeah, it's hard to know who's buying your stuff when you're selling online. And I think our initial assumption was that this is going to be for a younger customer because it's online and you have to know how to use a computer or something. So, and obviously old people don't know how to do that. And also it was going to be bankers or consultants or people that have very good salaries and are wealthy. That was our initial assumption. Turns out we were wrong on both of those. Actually, old people do know how to use computers and phones, and a lot of them are quite savvy. And also, it wasn't just bankers and consultants that were shopping. It was really quite broad across the board. And like I said, it's hard to tell when you're just selling online. But when we started doing a showroom in our 4th year, a physical place where customers could come in and get measured and try stuff on and browse fabrics, and that's when you could just see it, like folks like in their 70s or 80s who were like, you know, had their custom shirt guy and pass away or something, and they needed a new option, and they thought it was just the most wonderful thing they'd ever discovered. Or we started to really push into casual sports shirts and really, I think, come up with some really beautiful, unique styles. And so startup kids who didn't have to wear a suit and tie to work, but they were wearing button-up shirts to work, wanted their fit to be right. They started to like what we were doing. I think the other thing about custom fit was we also expected it to be really, really tall people or like basketball players because they can't shop off the rack. They only people with obviously unique proportions would need custom fit. But an interesting thing was that seemingly normal-sized people all would say, "Oh yeah, I need custom because," and it would be like, "My arms are a little short," or "My neck is a little big compared to my body," or "I have a long torso," or like you'd look at him and be like, "Oh yeah, you probably fit like a medium, great." But no, in his mind, something was wrong, and it kind of is a reminder that, you know, we're all like unique and we see ourselves differently than other people see us.
It's interesting because in many ways, the birth of online retailing, for many people, the strength of it was its ability to reach as many people as possible. It was very, the early sort of success stories were around catalog companies like J. Crew because they were scaling in a really big way. And it's funny because now we're in 2019 and the conversation is more about custom. And I think for the first time, we're realizing that technology can create a more one-on-one relationship. That was not the case in 2008 per se. Again, you were one of the pioneers. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about sort of that shift that's happening in the market in general, this desire. And I think to piggyback on that, is there a man who's, this is a way to have something a little bit unique and different? Because let's be honest, for the last 30 years, buying ready-to-wear for men is not very interesting or exciting, and custom has all but gone away, really. So I'm just curious sort of how those two things kind of connect.
You mean how we want personalized experiences?
Yeah, so the technology piece that's sort of facilitating that, but also I think the bigger shift that's happening in the market, especially around menswear, for a desire for more customized clothing.
Yeah. So when in the early couple years, we saw really two value propositions we were offering. One was custom fit, and the other was you can design your own product. And we had early adopters for that. You could tell some really were only interested in designing it and having the buttons be unique and the collar be unique, and the fit was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm sure it's going to fit, it's fine. And some were like, I want a plain white shirt that looks exactly like the other plain white shirts, but I need it to fit exactly right. We kind of those I want to design my own shirt customers were the first to come to us, and very loud, like, I need this option, I need this option. The custom fit customers were a little quieter, but what we eventually found was that the custom fit became a much more important factor for us. That there are, and this is another sort of thing where you're in design school, right? You're surrounded by designers. You ask your peers, like, wouldn't it be cool to design your own? And everyone's gonna be like, yeah, that would be really cool, because, well, we're all here in design school, right? So, like, obviously this group is gonna be interested in that. But what we did find, though, I think, was that a lot of guys, the idea of designing their own thing was very overwhelming. And so they wanted a custom fit. They liked the idea of knowing that maybe they played a small role in designing it. Like, oh yeah, I always get a pocket, so I want a pocket on it, or I like this particular collar style. Or even, not I want to design my own, but I know what I want. I always like a cutaway collar. I always like mother of pearl buttons. I like the cuff that has a square cuff or whatever. They knew what they want. It was less about expressing themselves through a really unique design and more about getting exactly what they wanted. But at the same time, we now offer over 700 fabrics to choose from. There's a lot of different style of kind of textile patterns to choose from. So I think when someone shops with us, they also think that, yeah, this is, this particular corduroy shirt is a limited edition. It's if I buy this, I'm probably not going to see my coworker wearing the exact same thing. So there was a little bit of that, but the full-on design my own product, I think, is often overwhelming for a lot of customers.
So you have a unique sort of user acquisition model in the sense that you can't just go on and buy a shirt. You have to spend however many minutes to sort of set up your profile. And so I'm curious, sort of, how did you develop something that gave you enough information to get them started and made them feel like they were part of it, but also, it wasn't 45 minutes later and they're thinking, oh my God, I'm done, and moving on to the next website?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it was a really important question for us. Because the first versions of what we did, one, you had to design a shirt. There was no pre-designed styles to choose from. And two, the only way you could create a size was by entering in your body measurements or your shirt measurements. And what we found was that a lot of people they liked the idea of what we were doing, and they had good intentions that, oh, I'm going to measure myself when I go home tonight, my wife will help me, but it just never happened. And so you'd kind of lose them. And you'd say, hey, how's it going? Like, oh, yeah, I've been meaning to do that. I'm going to get to that. So we were like really having trouble scaling the business and acquiring customers. And we would try doing advertising to drive people to the website, but they wouldn't really be purchasing. So we couldn't continue advertising. So we were sort of stuck there. And then this was like in the second year, I guess, or third year, we kept having these kind of conversations with customers where someone would call in and say like, hey, I'm trying to get a shirt, like, I don't have time to measure myself, but like, what size should I get? Or like, is your slim like a really slim, or is it kind of not slim? And so you'd start asking, after doing a lot of fittings in person, I'd start to ask them questions like, okay, well, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? Like, are you like in pretty good shape, or like, where are you? And then you could say, okay, well, if he's, I don't know, over 6'3", then like, I'm probably going to want to make the sleeves a little longer. If he's like a skinny 6'3" versus a heavy 6'3", I might make the shirt a little narrower, or the sleeves a little slimmer, or the body a little slimmer. So it just was like common sense, right? After you've done a bunch of fittings, you could draw those conclusions. That ultimately led to the development of this algorithm we call Smart Sizes, which is basically an 11-question questionnaire that customers answer, and they tell us the t-shirt size they wear. I won't say everything. The t-shirt size they wear, their body weight, their height, their waist size of their pants, the type of shape they're in. Do they tuck their shirts in or not tuck their shirts in? Do they like it to fit really slim or more comfortable? The idea was all these questions should be easily answerable by your average guy. The average guy does not necessarily know his chest measurement or his like neck measurement or his shoulder width, but he does know these questions. So we had this questionnaire, and then we would predict what your perfect dimensions would be, and kind of created this this is where the electrical engineering came in handy. So we created this first version with, I was working out of an incubator, so I just measured, I had 30 people answer all these questions, and then I measured them, and then I figured out what their size should have been, and started to kind of try to correlate or kind of find the relationships between their answers and their dimensions, and then and it worked okay, or I should say it worked better than if they just ordered a 16 collar or a size small or medium. It worked better than that. So I was like, okay, this is better than ordering off just a standard size. It's not quite as good as getting a full on fitting, but it's progress. And then over the years, though, as we had more and more customers go into this, we've been able to refine that algorithm and actually create some really powerful machine learning around further optimizing the algorithm to better predict the dimensions of the shirt.
It's so interesting, though, I mean, because you are an online digital space native, but it took going back to the actual human being and having that sort of contact to start the algorithm, essentially, yeah?
Yeah, you got to interact with your customers. You know, you have to like talk to people and like see people and look them in the eye and involve yourself in solving their problem, I think, to kind of have breakthroughs like that.
Do you think now that you're 11 years into this that that this sort of systemic approach to design in terms of algorithmic predictions and things like that, is that the future, do you think, in most categories in fashion, or do you think that it's still very much focused on key areas like shirts? I mean, in many ways, a shirt is a very specific, garment. So I'm just curious if you see this as potentially having traction in other markets or other categories.
That's a tough question. I think for products that you have a single form factor, and the shirt is a great one because all shirts have a collar, they have buttons, they have sleeves in a certain way. The silhouette doesn't change in a major way. I wouldn't do this for like trucker jackets per se, or like some other categories where there's lots of different silhouettes. But I think when you have a sort of standard product and you're just trying to fit it, you're just trying to get the customer what they want, and the customer knows what they want, I think that's when these algorithms can be really helpful. It's different than really surprising people with a new look, which is, I think, what a lot of fashion brands today do and makes them successful. It's different than that, but it's related, but I don't know. It's a tough one.
What about sort of shift from sort of male body to female body? Because I'm sure you've had women that have said, "Hey, I want the same thing, but again, this is a whole different sort of fit."
Yeah, we have women customers for sure. We love our women customers. We don't market to women. I don't know if I have a good reason why we don't, except that it seemed that the marketing and branding of a women's wear brand and a menswear brand was like maybe a lot to manage and handle. So when women come into the showroom, we can custom fit them. Sure, it's a piece of cake, but as far as marketing it and kind of branding it as here's the best women's custom shirts, we've shied away from that.
So before we open it up to questions, 2019, it's been 10, 11 years. What are sort of the key areas that you look back on and are proud of sort of successes? It's not easy to start a company, and a fashion company. You've defied the odds. The typical company usually makes it 3 to 4 years in this space, if even that. So I'm just curious, if you kind of looking back, what are 2 or 3 things that you think really made the difference?
Yeah, so many things. I mean, today we're 40 people. We have a beautiful office in Soho with a showroom there. We have a lot of great people on the team. I think it's just a great place to work and people to kind of be around, and so I'm obviously very happy about that, just from a kind of lifestyle and sort of being able to do what you want to do. That's kind of something that I'm really happy. I think the fact that we ended up making the business work without raising a lot of, or really any external capital, has been very rewarding. Like I said, very painful, and probably like made us vulnerable to die in the first couple of years more than otherwise. But over the long term, it allowed us to avoid hiring too fast, or getting ourselves in a position where we now needed to raise more money, and then if we didn't raise more money, we would now be overextended, and it also made it so that we felt less pressure to do a promotion this month so that we can show like the numbers went up so that someone else will want to invest in us. But doing that promotion that month was also maybe hurting your brand long term. So it enabled us to focus more long term. And so I think a lot of businesses that raise a lot of money, a lot of these kinds of businesses that raise a lot of money early on, big goals, big dreams, can find themselves 3 years in sort of unable to hit the next goal that they need to hit, and ultimately have to end their businesses for that reason or exit them in some way. And so I think that the fact that we've been able to do it on our own terms has enabled us to really create the business we want to create and be in control of it. And so I think that's been a kind of key part of it.
I think that's so important, because if anything, what we're hearing or seeing is a lot of these companies that had venture capitalists or a lot of money, it's very difficult for them to get into that 5th, 6th year because they're just too big for themselves. Their goals are too big, and like you said, they can't pay it back. And I think it goes to sort of this idea, especially in fashion, that it just takes a lot of at work to make this work, right? I mean, you mentioned you did this yourself for 3 years on your own.
Yeah, it takes time. You're learning as you go, and it just takes so much time to develop, like, how are we going to do, what is our packaging going to look like? How is our customer service going to work? What's our brand about? What's our personality? What's the user experience going to be? How do I make a shirt that's really a great shirt, or a product that's a great product? it takes so much time to figure those things out, and we're learning as we go. And so if I'm suddenly on a venture capitalist timetable of, okay, you're going to double next month or next year, and I'm not ready, I'm just going to trip over myself to try and do that. So if you can avoid that, it enables you to do things on your own terms, and I think ultimately get the product right over a longer term.
It's what creates the value that allows you to sell at the price point that you're at, because you're not a promotional company.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's lots of companies that raise money and do great. So, I mean, it's not to say that that can't work, but I have definitely seen several cases where it seemed to create incentives within the business that were toxic, and ultimately.
I do want to open up to questions. Can I get you over here to get the mic so that we can pass that along? Who would like to ask the first question? All right. So if you could pass it along to the middle. Yeah. Down here.
Hey, hi.
Hi.
I've always felt that bespoke and custom made has been associated with an experience or something that's got a more personal touch. How do you kind of do that online, like on e-commerce?
Well, I don't know if we really worry too much about what it's been associated with or what people have thought it was in the past, and we just really focus on what do we think the best way is going to be today given what we have. So we know that customers want a way to create and manage a custom size, so we try to give them tools to do that, whether that's smart sizes or coming into our showroom or measuring something at home. We know they want to customize the design of their shirt in some way, so we create a configurator where they can make changes to the style of the shirt. And we really just listen to them, and when a problem comes up, try to figure out a solution for it. And I think don't worry about what people think something should be based on what it used to be.
Thank you.
Right behind you.
Hello, so you mentioned the showroom in Soho, and I want to know, do you recommend every apparel in the company to have offline experience, such as a showroom?
Yeah, the question is, should you have an offline experience? We didn't have one for a long time, and we were able to do pretty good. But I think there's some percent of the population that will buy things without seeing it in person, and there's some percent of the population that needs to see it in person. And ironically, probably I would prefer to shop in person myself. So I understand that. I think if you're only online, you can get traction, but ultimately, as you try to grow beyond a certain point, having a physical location where customers can come in is necessary. And there's some really cool things you can do with a physical showroom, like create your brand experience in a way that's hard to do online only. So I think there's a lot of wonderful things and fun things to do with physical retail as well.
What have you learned about how men shop now that you have a showroom? Is there anything just sort of insight about how men might be a little different in their shopping habits?
Well, the main insight is that all men are different. And if you try to say, how do men shop, you're already wrong. So there's some guys who are just like, okay, cool, like, tell me what's good, let's get out of here. And there's some guys who are like, hold on, what's the difference between this button and that button? And can I get this? Can you raise this a 1/4 inch? Like, and they want to like really get it right. So it's just like such a wide spectrum. And I think we just try to adapt. We just try to adapt to it, and the training of the customer service and the folks that are in there is like, read the guy. If he, don't drown him in information if he's not looking for that, but be prepared, because if he wants to know, what the difference is between a Thomas Mason twill and Canclini twill, like you better be able to tell him.
There's a question here. I'm so glad you said that, by the way, because I think that the fashion industry often just says all men shop this way. The only way you can give them is to give them a haircut and a scotch. Otherwise, they don't show up.
Yeah, that's definitely the, that's how it's portrayed in the movies, right? That's like the man's man is just, yeah.
Hello. I did some research on your website, and then it's very convenient for the customer to buy online. It's like they can choose the fabric they like and what kind of the color and the cuff like that. But I have the questions. Do you make before the customer order online or after that? Because many customers have the problem on the store, and maybe they make this kind of shirts, many of them, and then they cannot sell it of them.
Yeah. So do we make the shirts before customers order them? No, we make everything to order. We don't like make shirts, have them stocked, and then maybe change some things on them. Everything's made to order. So this is where the supply chain and that setup was important. And obviously, being able to deliver the product as quickly as possible is like high priority for us. We're in a lot of ways we're competing with off-the-rack brands, and you can buy something online and have it delivered in a few days today. So we want to make our delivery as fast as possible. So really developing the ability to do it made to order quickly has been key. Mm-hmm. But also it has a huge advantage for us in terms of inventory and inventory management. So now we stock a lot of fabric, rolls of fabric, but we don't stock any finished shirt products. So if a particular, so one, we don't have any problems where like, oh, we only have extra larges and extra smalls left, like what should we do with those? We don't have that problem. Mm-hmm. If anything, we have a problem where there's 40 meters of this Hawaiian print you did over the summer that didn't sell. That's like, 20 shirts worth. So should we sell it? Well, you can just leave it. We'll sell it next year. There's inventory of fabric, but not inventory of finished products.
Okay, thank you.
And that's your shirts only, because I'm assuming like pocket squares and things like that, you do have inventory.
Yeah, shirts are that way. And then now with the made-to-order trousers and sport coats and suits, they're also the same. But yeah, the other products are mostly made in Italy in the very traditional way with a good supplier.
And what is your shipping turnaround typically for a shirt?
For shirts, right now it's Chinese New Year, or Chinese New Year just finished, so it's a little extended. But generally, we're in this 10 to 15 day range. That's from the time it's ordered to when it's delivered to the customer. So you have to factor in shipping and all this stuff.
Other questions? Down here?
Do you find that customers are becoming more interested in your supply chain, like fair trade or more information about, what that supply chain actually looks like?
Yes. Not a lot, but yeah, I think there's been a lot more. Everlane and some others have been very public with their supply chain, and so that question comes up more regularly, but I wouldn't say it's like an overwhelming demand for information.
It's a small amount.
Yeah, and it kind of comes up in the forums sometimes, and it's kind of a tough question to answer, and you want to be truthful, but like there's always some competitive information there, and then there's also like even the best brands like, okay, I don't know exactly where the buttons were made or something. So it's something that we've always been blessed, I think, since we're not going for the lowest price product, that we're not working with the lowest price factories. So, and we've never really been aggressive with, okay, we need to cut 20 cents out of this, like, because we're a small company, we can do it on our own terms. It's not like we don't have those same incentives. So I think we've been able to continue to work with really great partners that, and I visit the factories and kind of see the folks, and it's a good kind of friendly operation. So I think this year we'd love to invest into telling that story more, but so far it hasn't been really a part of our brand explicitly like it has been for Everlane or other brands.
Over here.
Hi. So I read an old interview of yours, and it mentioned, I don't know how credible it was, but it mentioned that you had almost no contacts in the industry. And for someone who's not a part of the fashion industry, for me, it's conceptually, I can't imagine just starting something entrepreneurial. For you, what was the experience like, kind of discovering which factories to go to and which are the right ones, and how did you kind of break and to get your foot in the door?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. I did not have any fashion connections. My family didn't come from that industry. I didn't study it. The answer is just hard work and kind of a combination of internet research, asking everyone you know, them introducing you to some people, asking them for introductions, them introducing you to people, asking them for introductions, and just kind of chasing things down. And finding a factory to work with you when you're a new brand is particularly challenging. And so I mentioned our first factory was in North Carolina, our second factory was in New Jersey, and then we moved to factory in Malaysia. That factory in Malaysia would not even respond to my email when I first started, and they wouldn't for over a year. It was only after we'd been established and had shown some success and shown some real commitment to what we were doing, and I think established ourselves as an innovative company that they finally were willing to invest some time in working with us. But in the beginning, it was a factory in North Carolina. Also, this was 2008, so if you remember, the industry the whole sort of economy was kind of collapsing and everyone was scared. So this particular factory in North Carolina, they basically couldn't say no to anybody because it was hey, I want to buy your product. And they were like, okay, sure. So that's how I got to that first factory, and that was again through a very roundabout researching, finding, and then someone telling Coke, call this guy, and someone saying call that guy, and then eventually reaching the right person. And yeah.
You mentioned sort of horizontal growth in the sense of new categories and such. Are you also looking at other functionalities like subscription models and things like that? What's sort of in the horizon?
We are not looking at subscription explicitly. We this year we would like to expand our our showroom, which seems to be a really great part of our experience for customers in New York. We'd like to offer that in more locations, and then we've been experimenting and doing a lot of fun things with marketing and advertising and just trying to figure out how to get the word out about what we do in a way that's efficient and informative and on brand for us. So there's been we did our first national TV commercial late last year, radio commercials, mailers, magazine stuff. So there's been lots of fun advertising for the shirt business. And at this point we have maybe 150,000 custom shirt customers today. We think we can have 1 million. We think there's lots of opportunity to grow still, but we just have to get the word out there and educate people.
Any other questions? Okay.
I'm just curious, how do you convince a factory to make your product when you're not upfront just asking for 1,000 shirts or something? How do you get them to make a shirt at a time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And like I said before, we were kind of in that custom shirt. We knew we wanted to do custom, and so we went to factories that were doing custom already. If I wanted, we've expanded to other categories now, right? And so we make we started making ties, and then we started making pocket squares, and now we've done some cool raincoats or sport coats or trucker jackets. And so for those, we found that any supplier in Asia would have higher minimums than we wanted to do, and also would have more risk we felt like there was more risk in getting the product right, whereas in Italy we were able to get them made at lower minimums and with a great quality. So Italy and Europe has been, I think, a key part of our sourcing of what we call stocked products, but without doing really high minimums. And once you have many, there's a reason you don't want to make a lot, right? You're not sure if the customer is going to like it. You're not sure if it's actually a good design. You're worried that your zipper is going to be the wrong zipper. Your buttons are going to fall off, or who knows. You have product risk. You have market risk. Once we've maybe made something and sold 50 or 100 of them, and we start to be, you can get a sense. They sold really fast, or they sold pretty slow, and then when you feel like, yeah, there's a lot of demand for this particular product as we made it, then I think you can start to talk to suppliers in Asia that can do it at a higher volume for a more competitive price point. But and you can have confidence that, yeah, if we make 1,000 cashmere sweaters, like, we'll sell them, but you wouldn't do that on day one.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think there was, especially among European manufacturers, reticence for these sort of American startups, right? But in many ways, it's these startups like yours that I think are sort of bringing them up into the sort of the new century and giving them a whole new way to stay in business, because so many of them were sort of going out of business.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the Italian garment district, except for the factories that we've gone to and visited, and they're typically family-run operations and real artisans, and they might have one or two big customers that's maybe really driving their business, but those orders have been going down as those customers maybe move things more offshore, or their businesses slow down in general. So there's an inherent distrust and kind of nervousness on their part that you're not going to pay, or you're not for real or something. But once you can kind of get past that, they're often really passionate about making a great product, and kind of sitting down with their in-house designer and brainstorming, and they've got samples all over the place and pulling something and saying, oh, what about this? And then seeing something in the corner and saying, oh, that fabric's really cool. Can we see that fabric? And they get really excited to work with you. And then as you have success, season after season, next year they see it happening, and things kind of grow together.
We have time for one more question from the audience. Okay.
Hi. You touched a little bit about your experience at business school, and that was kind of where you got the idea for this company. Was there any other part of your experience at business school that kind of helped you in developing it and brought you to where you are today?
Yeah. Business school, or I think school in general, is a great opportunity to start something, or at least have the idea for something, because you have, I think, mental space, and you're kind of invited to explore new ideas, and your schedule's a little more flexible. That was a big part of what made that a good time for me to start the business, because I had flexibility. I could, I wasn't working. I didn't have to be at the office at 9 and be there till 6. It was kind of I could spend all Thursday afternoon working on it. So that was part of what made that a great time. Another thing was that I think when you're in school in a school at FIT, this definitely applies. you have some credibility behind you, and you're able to reach out to people and have them respond to you in a nice way that you don't necessarily have when you're just a professional somewhere else. So I remember like calling around looking for factories. That was part of my introduction, was I'm a grad student here at MIT and I want to learn more about this, and can you help me? And that seemed to help open more doors. And even like for market research, like I'd call at one point I called every custom shirt company I could find. I told them I was a student at MIT, I was researching for a project. How many shirts do you sell per month? And I just asked everybody, how much do you sell, to try to get a sense of how big is this market? And if I said, hey, I don't know, I work at Goldman Sachs and I want to start a business, how much shirts do you sell? They'd probably hang up the phone. But as a student, folks are like interested to engage with you and help you. So I think that's something you can use to your advantage. And then the other part is you're just generally surrounded by creative people that are also often interested in starting something or interested in talking to you about that or entertaining that idea. And that's really key. I think when you're in a job and you're working 9 to 5 and folks are more worried about getting to happy hour or, I don't know, their own personal vacation or something, it's less of an environment where you're creating things. And I think being in school, being surrounded by creatives, it just helps you like foster those small ideas into real things.
Thank you.
That really segues into the last question that I wanted to ask. I know you sort of were joking a little bit that you would love to be here going to school as a student, but I'm curious from your point of view, because you didn't go to fashion school, you now have a business in fashion. What would you think that students should be thinking from a design perspective differently that perhaps isn't being taught at a traditional fashion school? What do you think, what would you like to see in hiring somebody at at Proper Cloth?
Yeah, so few things. I think there's technical skills are like important, and Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop are just kind of like, you should know that. Excel is another tool that like comes in handy a lot, that it's great if folks know that. I think for me, and what we often look for in a lot of hires is this kind of engineering mindset of like, let me break this down. Like this product maybe seems beautiful and ephemeral and just like amazing, but let's like break it down into its actual components and start to kind of make it a real thing. Okay, it's this fabric, it's these buttons, it's this shape, it's this sort of stitching. Okay, now I know how to make that. So I think when you're working in fashion, you're always presented with problems, and sometimes those problems are soft and hard to put your finger on, but being able to break those problems down into their sub-problems and their sub-questions and then research them and answer those questions is just like the kind of key ability that helps you make things work in the industry.
I like that. Fashion is engineering.
Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Just as a reminder, although I don't think I have to do this, next week is a holiday, right? So nobody was going to come next week. All right.